My name's Mike Ledwidge, and this is a series of 3 videos that are trying to explain the things that have gone wrong within our public services over the last 25 years. I was a public servant for nearly 30 years. I've got a degree in systems management statistics, an MBA, and I've been researching this stuff. What I'm telling you is the truth. And I would like to think that if you are a public servant, you really ought to know this stuff, so at least you get a chance to challenge what is going on. The 3 videos, one will be about targets, because the public services suffer from output national targets that are really stupid. There's an academic field that says you can't be doing that, and I'll explain. Secondly, the way that the public services have been motivated over the last 25 years has been a really bullying approach, and there's an academic field to do with motivation and morale with a number of very good experts that shows what should be done and how we're doing it wrong at the moment. And then the third is the public-private issue, where chunks of the public services are being given to private companies, and in many cases that doesn't work at all well. And I'll explain how all these things fit together. What I'll also do is just go through a few things that link into this, and you'll realise that almost everything you see on the news that you get concerned about nowadays links into this stuff in some way or another. For instance, why did the superbugs take off when they did in hospitals and kill so many people and maim so many people? Why such a disproportionate number of our population became the Olympians in the last Olympics from private schools? So 40% of our Olympians were from private schools, but only 10% go to private school. There's a reason for that, and that can be explained. Why people die unnecessarily waiting for ambulances when the ambulance should have been available to come and collect them. Why we had riots in London. One of the underpinning reasons fits in with this. Why the child abuse in Rotherham was hidden for so long, and why whistleblowers are given such a hard time by the current system. Why schools won't let so many children take exams. Why there's issues to do with quality of care in hospitals, or some hospitals. Why some of you may, or many of you I know, will have got criminal records you shouldn't have because you actually haven't committed a crime. Why the rape victims in Southwark, because many rape victims in Southwark were persuaded not to report their rapes for a numerical reason, for a target reason. Why so many actually very committed public servants have been leaving in the last 20 years, and they're still leaving, and we need to hang on to them. Why instead of a parking ticket being put on your car, you've ended up having to go to a pound and claim your car back for 350 quid when you should have just had the parking ticket. And why our rivers fill regularly with sewage when it should only be once in a blue moon. Why we struggle to repair infrastructure, whether it's railway infrastructure or repairing things when we end up with a power cut. All these things are linked together with the 3 issues, and these 3 videos I hope will help you understand that. Okay. Now the first video, I'm going to try and explain the systems issue and the reason why you cannot performance measure a complex system by outputs. That's a very specific sentence. Now, systems are everything, in everything. Every business, every organisation is a system of some sort. And every system has 3 major elements. It has inputs, it has process, and it has outputs. And a simple system looks something like this. Now, the 3 elements of a simple system are the inputs. It'll be machinery, equipment, materials, finance, staff, whole range of things come into the system. Some sort of process takes place, and it'll be a restaurant making meals for people to eat. It might be a factory making motor cars. It might be a factory making plastic bins. But it's a simple system because it has one major output, and the major output is the financial bit of the business. They are selling so many meals a day. They're selling so many motor cars. They're selling so many plastic bins. And because that has a bottom line, and the bottom line is the main output, you can performance measure the simple system on outputs. And to improve that output target, you can change your processes. You might train your staff to be a bit better at what they do. You might input new machinery or input cheaper materials to make the process more efficient. But most of the changes will be occurring because you're changing the inputs to the system. Because you can, it's your business. You can change your staff, you can move location to another country. You can even change what you're making to produce something that's more financially beneficial. You can start making tractors instead of motor cars. And of course you can change your customers. You can refuse to provide the service to certain customers because they're paying a lower rate, and you just come up with a posher type of meal in a posher type of restaurant. There's lots of things you can do to end up using the performance measurement of the output. Now, a complex system is very different. It looks more like this. And it still has inputs, process and outputs. And there are a number of major differences, as you can see. One of them is that you've got a whole range of inputs, many of which it's unethical for you to play with. For instance, you have no right to control who comes into a hospital. So there's a whole range of inputs to the system that you don't have ethical control of. The processes are very complex and they're interdependent. So if you take resources out of one part of the process and put it into another part, take money out of cleaning and put it into the targets on waiting times or something, then you change what's happening within the system. And of course there's lots of different outputs. If you start measuring some outputs, you screw the system because you end up with other outputs becoming either sort of contrary or negative. For instance, you start measuring police on arrests and detections, they don't want to do anything in terms of prevention because the prevention stuff means that there won't be the crimes that they can arrest and detect. So this academic field means that if you start performance measuring a complex system by any of its outputs, you start mucking up the processes. So you end up with, for instance, under the Labour Party, because of the targets elsewhere in the hospital system, cleaners, they halved the number of cleaners, the cleaning was awful. I've got some awful tales you could hear about the quality of cleanliness in hospitals. The superbugs took off and people died because some idiot at Whitehall was measuring hospitals by outputs. The other thing is they start mucking about with inputs because most of the time they can't change the middle bit very much. Inputs to the system, like patients. How do you manage a casualty system where the hospital loses a penalty chunk of money if they don't reach their target for seeing people, either admitting them or them being seen by a doctor within 4 hours? So you actually slow down the inputs to the system by making patients waiting ambulances for hours in car parks. So the likes of Fred Pring, who died last year waiting for an ambulance that was sitting in a hospital car park with a patient in the back because it couldn't get the patient out the back into casualty, that death is caused by someone in government who decided they'd have an output target, which was the casualty waiting time. So these systems, you start skewing it. In policing, for instance, you end up with people that are just drunk and not disorderly. They're just sitting in the doorway drunk and half asleep, get arrested. That's not a crime. But because disorderly conduct's a crime, they're being charged, and thousands of people this has been done to, they're being charged with disorderly conduct, which they weren't disorderly. They get them to sign a caution in the morning for disorderly conduct, take fingerprints, photograph and DNA, and they've now got a criminal record that they shouldn't have because they weren't disorderly. And that's the way of the police massaging the numbers to come up with the target set by government. In education, I was involved in education quite a while, and to start with, exclusions quadrupled within 2 years of Thatcher introducing league tables, within 2 years. Then, because the exclusions were being measured, lots of kids were being told not to come into school, and it was like a condoned truanting. Then that's starting to be measured. The current trick is to not allow the kids that will do badly in exams take the exams. We have between 40 and 50,000 children a year in this country leave school without a single qualification, because the way the school prevents them ending up on the output target of league tables is to not allow them in to the system to take the exam. So they're mucking about unethically with the input to the system. So right across the piece, you cannot performance measure a complex system by outputs. If you do, every time something will go wrong. The resources will get skewed in your system. I mean, there was a really good article in The Independent only about a year or so ago, and I'll show you a graph in a moment. The concern was hospital beds were being blocked by people who were unnecessarily being admitted to hospital, were there for just a few hours and then being sent home again. And all the paperwork, all the bedding, a whole load of stuff was causing problems, because then there were no beds available for people who really needed them. If you actually look at the graph of entrance into casualty and the time these people were being admitted, and just have a look at this graph, you'll notice that nearly every person was being admitted, nearly everyone, and you can see from that graph how bad it was, in the 10 minutes before the 4-hour casualty clock ticked over to beyond the 4 hours. So to solve the problem of the casualty clock, the 4-hour casualty clock, to be seen by a doctor or be admitted within 4 hours, they've solved it simply by admitting all those people into hospital to keep their targets, their output targets. So the problem is being created, and you end up with contradicting targets. When kids are kicked out of school, when they are excluded or kicked out of the system, they are going to become more of a problem to society. They are much more likely to be involved in crime. We have a Crown Prosecution Service who has targets for success in court, and you end up with them not taking to court cases that should be heard, simply because they don't think they'll win. We had people involved in the Immigration Service to up their numbers for the targets. They were pulling people out of the queue and who were leaving the country. They literally bought their tickets and they're leaving the country, and they were a day or so over on their visa because they'd been here on holiday and they'd fallen ill or something. But they were pulling them out of the queue, giving them a deportation notice, and then putting them back on the plane that they're already paid the ticket for. But that's the way of pumping up the results, the numbers, to make them look good. We have to stop output performance targets. And what you do instead is you have quality of process. You have ways of measuring the quality of what you're doing. You introduce best practice into the processes, and you look elsewhere. What are people doing well that we're not doing? And you find better ways of doing the process, and eventually what comes out of those complex systems is better. I mean, there is a thing called restorative practice or restorative justice that is actually cutting crime on youth teams significantly. It's reducing exclusions in school. It's great. The snag is, for instance, something really good like that introduced into a school, when the school has got targets to be in the league table, the head teachers may not want those kids to remain in the school. They may want them excluded. So the good quality stuff ends up being not used because it doesn't fit with the target culture that some of these organisations are striving for. And you end up with a shift, and we'll talk about it in the other videos, end up in a shift in the culture in organisations where the people that get to the top are the people that play this game. So the people that play the targets game are the people that filter to the top of the system, because that's the only way that their careers advance. And you end up with serious problems because so many people at the top of these organisations just want to play the game because it's about their career. So in conclusion, if you're looking at systems and you're looking at measuring things, you can measure the outputs. Measuring the outputs is really useful because it gives you information that can make you ask the right questions. You cannot performance measure by the outputs. if you measure the outputs and you find information and it says this school's doing really well, you might go and have a look at the school and find out the reason why they're doing really well is because they have an entrance exam and only the brightest kids go to that school, and therefore they're going to have good results. So actually to measure these processes is important, but what you need to do at the end of the day is to find a way to measure it and not do damage through the measuring process. And to do that, you need to understand systems well enough to do the job.